All right. Folks, ladies and gentlemen, we are live. And the reason we still have the picture up is one of our friends of the show, E. Smitty at Sound Alive Radio, is also going to be streaming on the Evernote blockchain. And so TruthStream is the flagship show. And what it is, it's kind of like Sirius Radio, but it's not on the internet. It is on the Evernote blockchain, and we're going to be learning more about that as it unfolds. And so there's just a lot of new technologies that are coming out, and we're meeting all these great people and interspersing these technologies into the show. And like I did a show with East Smitty this morning, and just there was some technical difficulties, but that's okay. We're figuring all that out as we go. And so that being said, we're about to roll the intro, because that's supposed to be part of the show, and we're very excited to have SG here. And we're going to roll that. So without further ado, we'll roll the intro and go from there. We're going to have a great show tonight. Thank you all for your patience so much.
So much to talk about.
Yeah, so much to talk about. So, and since I'm part of Sound Alive, Smitty has requested this opener, which is my song Lifting Veils. I'm honored to be on Sound Alive Records and Sound Alive Radio, and now TruthStream is part of the Sound Alive Talk, which is on soundaliveradio.net. So without further ado, here comes the intro, and we will go from there. All right, everybody.
I've known for some time something about the world ain't right. The darkness lives in plain sight, in the ether. Adjust your eyes. There are those that have no clue. You give them hints, they just stare at you. Most had lived in Plato's cave, watching.
All right. Well, we are live, and where is that picture? There it is. Welcome everybody to TruthStream. We are here once again. It's, I believe, since we were in Costa Rica in May with SG Anon.
All right.
His little one spilled some milk this evening, and SG had to clean that up, and I think he's gotten that taken care of. But SG, thank you so much for still joining us tonight, even at 11-something p.m. on the East Coast. It's an honor to have you here.
Well, we're not going to cry over spilled milk tonight. And little ones will introduce a surprise here and there. So we're just grateful to have you. So much going on. I don't even know where to begin. But, I just watched an interview with Tulsi Gabbard and, what is her name? Harmony. Anyway, it was about UFOs, and she was asked rather pointedly about the subject, and she had some interesting answers. So I'm sure you're on top of that, SG. First of all, how are you doing aside from the spilled milk?
Well, I was going to say, it's not worth crying over spilled milk, they say, but in the throes of a bedtime routine with an overtired and just cranky young one, sometimes a tear or two over an entire gallon being launched onto the carpet might be appropriate. We got it cleaned up. Luckily, I had a little bit of a steam tool that I had purchased quite a long time ago, actually, from the store. It was like a Bissell steam tool thing. I think it was originally intended for pet urine, and it worked really well, but it took a little while. Outside of that, I think that we've got a tremendous amount of much more interesting things to talk about, like what you highlighted with Tulsi just a second ago. But we've talked about this on your all show, gentlemen. I think you and I have talked about it numerous times about how the extraterrestrial or the other sentient being is what I term them. that disclosure component, that subsect of relearning our reality and understanding our place amongst the cosmos and our place amongst one another as part of this grander chorus with the living God. This is a major defining moment. It's going to have to come to the peoples, not just of the United States and the Western world, but the entirety of the world. Some cultures are more closely tied back to it and have greater historic roots and knowledge to bring to the table than others. But at the same time, you have groups out there that have also had significant contact in the last 100 to 200 years with these types of entities. So, with what you referenced with Tulsi in the interview just a moment ago, I found it very, very interesting that that's where you all wanted to start, because we are moving into this accelerated phase. And President Trump has essentially told us that a couple of times. It was just a couple of days ago, I think 4 or 5, maybe 6 days ago at this point, that he put out a pretty significant ode, a number of Q proofs, again, to his Truth Social profile, his personal Truth Social profile. And that entity has talked, ad nauseum about other things being out there. Are we really alone in the universe, along with a lot of other issues? So, I'm looking at the period of time that we're living in. We're building towards that public justice phase. We're building towards that public accountability phase. That seems patently obvious, even for a lot of people out there that, were not really awake even just a couple of years ago, have begun to come around and understand just the level of corruption, the virality of corruption inside the government. But moving from that accountability phase and through that justice phase, we also have to acknowledge what it's going to bring. And in discovery, in any really long legal battle, for example, you tend to learn more than what you thought you were going to learn initially. And I think that's the real takeaway here, is we're entering really into a hardcore period now that I'm anticipating to go all of the way to the end of this decade, to go through this Trump presidency into the next presidency beyond that. This is a really exciting journey.
Oh God, yeah. Exciting I wish there was a better word. It hardly conveys what's going on right now. This is such a turning point for humanity. It's germane to our politics here in the United States, but this is so global, it's not even funny.
Right. I wanted to ask SG, are you starting to notice, and we usually bring this up on the shows, but are you starting to notice either conversations with family, friends, people reaching out to you that may have doubted you before, like reaching out to you now, wondering what's going on? Or what's your personal experience been like in the recent months?
That's a really interesting question, Joe, I have to say. And, with respect to my own personal sphere, I have noticed a significant amount, actually, of traction coming around from a couple of different familial points, and at least one friend who at one point in time was very, very hardcore Sanders supporter, is against essentially anything conservatism or conservative values, because so much of that in his understanding of the world had been conflated so long with neoconism and, this seeking out of purposeful conflict and wars and things like that. And so I'm witnessing a lot in my personal orbit of, I wouldn't say like hardcore awakening, but the train is now officially away from the station. I have a family member who's really, really close to me, who actually approached me not that long ago about the UFO topic, and wanted to know a little bit more about, the entirety of what was hidden at Roswell, and, who is this Admiral Byrd character that he'd seen a couple of times, floating through the internet. And so I was ginger about it. I didn't try to give him, a college lecture right there on the moment. I just told him, here's the data points that I would start with. The Blue Book program with the U.S. Air Force, that's a phenomenal place that you can go. It's declassified. It's thousands of pages. The Roswell incident, obviously, we've got a great deal of claims and circulation out there and hearsay. But one of the things I think that a lot of people accept as true at this point, because it's come from a lot of different whistleblowers, is that Roswell resulted in the collection of non-human biologics, biological organisms. So we have to then say, where did those go? What do we know about them? Who worked on them? These types of things. So I'm seeing that people are beginning to come around to the taboo issues. They're beginning to come around to this idea of what it means to have a political process, with great corruption and great shielding from the public, as the public begins to learn what was actually behind the veil. That tends to bring, I think, a significant change in belief system. And we've watched that happening over the last 4 to 5 years, really for the last 7 years, on broadcasts like this and others, but it has to become a consciousness momentum that overtakes the general conversation. We have to normalize the discussion, for example, that we're not alone in the universe. We have to normalize the discussion that very salacious evil was being committed right under our noses by very clever groups, and we can't allow that to happen again. And if salacious evil is out there, then exhilarant and vital and vibrant good must also be out there, right? So in other words, God is real. We're sort of putting that question to rest in this day and time, literally in real time as we walk this path together. So I know it's a long answer, but to circle back to the question, everyone has to come around in their own time. And from my own personal point of view, I tend to take a less hard-nosed opinion or an orientation on this issue than a lot, because I've got a couple of people, 2 or 3 people that I've been close to since really post-teenage years, late college years, things like that, who have been, quite frankly, drinking the Kool-Aid for a long time, but they would be phenomenal patriots and very productive assets and partners and allies, really, in this walk towards bettering humanity and bettering this world to leave it better for the children that are going to be left behind when all of us are gone. They just need access to the proper information and to have their own spiritual experience and their spiritual awakening. And I'm seeing some of that begin to pop off in pretty significant ways.
Well, you really dropped a bomb there when you said, the acquiescence and acknowledgement of the existence of God is prescient. And, think about the impact of that alone. And that's something that is clearly fairly absent on the left. I think this battle, it really isn't a political battle. I think it's, I think it has everything to do with God. But what a beautiful statement. Do you want to speak any further on why that has become so obvious at this point? I think I know what you're getting at, but I'd love to hear it from your
to expand on that would be very welcome.
Yeah.
Well, I guess what I would say to that is, we live in a universe that is perfectly ordered, right? We have a day and a night. We have a light and a dark. We have, to use the terminology, a yin and a yang, or a balance on 2 sides of the coin, right? There is a certain amount of duality. We have 2 hands, we have 2 eyes, we have 2 ears. And so because of that, when we look at everything being an extension of the, God himself, the spirit, for lack of a better characterization, the almighty consciousness that is God, that gives rise to this material universe, we have to acknowledge that if significant evil has been allowed to exist as a part of that construct because of free will, because of the sacredness of having organisms that are imbued with consciousness, that are allowed to make their own decisions and come to their own personal preferences, conclusions, and self-direct and self-control in many regards their own destiny. And of course, we have to do so responsibly according to the good book. But if that is true, then the opposite must also be true. There must really actually be a divinity about us. There must be a cosmic order in this walk that we all live in. There must be a sustaining force, a sustaining factor to reality itself. Where does the quantum medium come from, for example? What is quantum non-locality and how does it work? What is the energy that you will observe in between electron particles if you have an electron microscope capable of that type of magnification when you point it at a solid surface like bricks or even your own arm? There's a great deal of just empty space, but you can see vibration, you can see buzzing. There is an action about it. There's a life force there. What is that life force? I purport to say that life force is God.
Well, I'd like to offer up this one little just, pearl of wisdom that I think I've collected over the course of this adventure is, someone had just commented about the battle between good and evil. And good and evil has always been subjective. Balance is balance. It's the nature of, it's the language of nature. And we've been incredibly imbalanced for a very long time. And I think if we think of things in terms of balance, we're probably moving collectively towards a more common goal than if we try and incorporate what we deem good or evil, because it changes all the time. Just to bore people with something I've said many, many times, they were chopping off heads and rolling them down the pyramid not too long ago. And that was considered a good. We tend to frown on it now, but it really is about balance. When you watch a gazelle get taken out by a lion in nature, that's a difficult thing to witness, but it's balance. So I would just encourage people to look at things in those terms, because I think it's a bit more honest, and I think it goes a bit beyond what we've been conditioned to believe is good or evil.
Well, I think that's a salient and an interesting point to make, right? What is normal and biologically appropriate and necessary for the spider is absolute hell for the fly. And so when you look at the dynamic, we'll call it a rebalancing of what's happening right now in the world. From time immemorial, we really don't have a good point that we can point to, at least that we know of, where there was a proper represented balance between what you would call the forces for goodness, for love, based in compassion, based in kindness, maybe we'll say based in higher photonic frequencies, higher vibrational areas, and higher realms, and those forces of darkness, and the countervailing point to that, what we would characterize as evil, antagonistic, what's the terminology, sort of blithe and lewd, going to keep with that particular comparison. And so as we look at what's happening now, we have had, to use the day and night cycle as sort of a metaphor of this, we've had thousands of years of daytime. It's time to have a little bit of nighttime, if you will, or we've had thousands of years of nighttime. So now we have to bring the sun up and really shine the light on the planet again and allow that balancing act to return. And I think that's one of the reasons that God has allowed the types of things to not only occur over the last, say, 500,000, 2,000 years, but also why this awakening not only has been prophesied by every major spiritual school going back more than 3,500 years, but also is moving along quite literally at a spiritually organic pace. This has to be a momentum building, balancing operation. There has to be the ability to overtake that evil momentum, the seesaw being so overbalanced in the other direction. It can't be done quickly. There's obviously some preventative forces, and you're also fighting just cosmic inertia at that quantum spiritual level, trying to shift the entirety of the understanding of quite frankly, of an entire species over a period of time, right? We're talking about shifting, especially with the extraterrestrial issue, the entirety of human consciousness. It's not just a political issue, it's our place in the universe issue, and it will fundamentally alter how Earth is considered, not only by inhabitants outside of our current realm, but also ourselves as the heirs apparent to the realm going forward in the centuries ahead.
Wow, beautifully.
You covered a lot of territory there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, on that note, people have been asking about our friend Kevin Hoyt, and Kevin Hoyt is part of the Grassroots Warrior Network, and he's been in the state of Vermont and naming names about certain police officers that were likely involved with human trafficking. But he may be a little ahead of the curve on the naming names, just my personal opinion. But I think to get humanity to the level of consciousness and awareness that not only is human trafficking real, but the the sacrificing of children, the adrenochrome harvesting, for people to really accept that and process that, their whole perception of reality in itself is pretty much flipped on its head. So, with when Biden came into office, and maybe you could help clarify this topic and subject, but it's really hard to think about. Trump was really had the borders and things in the works, and then Biden comes in, and then there's thousands and thousands of kids being trafficked, and now we're I think what we're seeing is a massive shift at the border. But what is your take on what's been really going on with the trafficking of children? Because it seems like, there's a lot of trafficking that has been taken care of in some ways, But I was on TikTok a few weeks ago, and there was a girl that was literally begging for help and wanting to know what she should do. And this is still very real, and there's still a lot of it. And until society and humanity is aware of the level of trafficking so that it can then be stopped, it's going to continue. So what is your take on the whole trafficking? Because that's the worst evil I can think of. I mean, when a child is not only alone and scared, but then they're taken off and God knows what is done to them, and then adrenochrome is harvested. Like, this is the worst. This is worse than any horror movie.
Yeah.
So,
how could you conceive of a greater horror?
right. And are these entities really even humans? Like, for money, you're going to do that? So it just makes me wonder what the hell is actually going on. If you could speak, I know that's quite a long-winded comment, but we get into those here. So any take on that would be appreciated.
Well, I think my take on that would be twofold. One, it's not only a human corruption or a human evil. It's beyond that. It's more than that. And we have insider testimony, whistleblower testimony, former CIA officer testimony, a former defense analyst from the Air Force who was murdered in the 80s came out and talked a little bit about this particular issue. We do have cross-species infiltration, and that occurred thousands and thousands of years ago. As a matter of fact, the Bible and a couple of other of the very old holy books talk about how at some point in time there was a commingling of DNA gene pools, and it predated one of the great floods. Of course, people from the Bible's version is the great flood of Noah, but that's only one of a number of great floods that happened in the last 35 to 50,000 years, depending on how you want to date things, goes out to 100,000. But regardless, that's not the important part. The important part is that there's been commingling, there's been infiltration, there has been an extraterrestrial or an other terrestrial presence within our own population groups, and quite literally individual entities that are capable of donning things like liquid latex, which is not liquid latex, liquid crystal, which is a substance that can mimic liquid latex in appearance, and it can essentially take on any sort of external feature that it needs to. There's other entities out there that, according to the CIA's own documents, possess shape-shifting abilities. So to open the question here, I think we have to acknowledge once again the rabbit hole goes deeper than just the evil on its face. Is it inconceivable? Of course, from the human perspective, obviously, we're all programmed instinctively, quite literally at the photonic DNA level, to preserve, protect, and defend the most vulnerable and the next generation of the species. So in order to override that, you do have to have a significant corruption of the soul. You have to have a significant corruption of the person. But that corruption, in my opinion, did not begin with God's creation of the human being itself, with the idea of this sin nature that's really more of a fallen, egocentric, vacuous nature. I purport to say that the actual serious practice that we're talking about, and some of the most salacious and seditious evil out there, was actually brought into this world and brought into this realm by individual entities that are not originally from it. And so when we look at what's actually happening in the world, there's a reason President Trump said for 4 years and then continued to say throughout the entire 4 years of the Biden administration that aliens were being interdicted on the border. There's a reason that the border wall is a gigantic free energy resonant device. And it also happens to work the same way. Joe, you'll appreciate this. It happens to work the same way as a tuning fork. So it will match the frequencies of the North American shelf as emitted by Mother Earth itself. And so looking at that was all purposeful, all planned, and you have to clean out darkness from those areas where you're going to generate high vibrational frequencies, because the darkness will destabilize whatever you're attempting to accomplish there, right? You cannot build a beautiful building on top of quicksand and dirty clay and poison swampish style soil. You have to pull that out. You have to go all of the way down to where you have good dirt again, and that's where you have to start building it. And so the border wall is one example of this war having a more multidimensional angle to it. The Epstein Island situation that happened in 2018, 19, and 20, when it was going on more in real time, that was another multidimensional angle. We had a post drop on one of the boards in 2018. As a matter of fact, it was very shortly after, maybe not even a month or two after I initially found the bulk of the Q drops on some of those boards that discussed how one of the things that the FBI had collected evidence from with respect to the Epstein Island was an underground cloning facility that existed on the island there and actually had its own submarine access port. And very interestingly, only a few days after that post dropped on the boards, we saw U.S. military forces on the island literally next door.
Wow.
So looking at what's happening in the world, you know, the child trafficking component, the human trafficking, the adrenochrome, you know, Aztec style barbarism and things like that, it's obviously, you know, evil and horrific, but there's a multidimensional and in my opinion, an interspecies angle that has to be considered here. You know, and stamping out that evil in all areas, not just in human society and in human behavior, but in all arenas of the world, and removing, you know, basically what amount to foreign entities, for lack of a better term. I think that's one of the things that we've had going on with this underground subterranean war that the Army spent almost $1 trillion on between 2015 and 2020 to get ready to fight.
Wow.
You know, I'd love it that we get into, you know, I suppose you could say the blue on this a bit. And I want to ask you, you know, what we're seeing from a, you know, astrological standpoint, the planetary alignments, the solar weather. I mean, we've had more crazy earthquakes in the last week than we've ever had in history, you know, above an 8 or whatnot, pardon the airplane. But
I don't think they could. You can keep talking.
okay, yeah, sorry about all that noise. So anyway, we've had fighter jets and all kinds of crazy, unusual activity overhead these days.
Literally.
Generally, when we're doing a show, but anyway, you know, with regards to the Great Awakening, what's happening with people and their DNA, what's happening, you know, whether it's physiological, whether it's astrological, astronomical, there's a lot of anomalies right now, you know, that are unprecedented. And this particular planetary alignment, I guess, hasn't happened for 26,000 years. It's one thing to have the planets line up like this. It's another thing for them to all be in retrograde together at a certain point. And I know we've all been feeling it, but what's your take on this? I mean, there really is a God element to what's happening right now, I think. What do you think?
You sort of stole the words right out of my mouth, Scott. My take on this is that is an example, that is evidence of the divinity, the perfect order of God in the cosmos stepping in to rebalance itself. You know, it's a self-sufficient, self-sustaining, closed universe that we live in. I say closed in the broader sense. You know, it's a free will universe, but there is an order to it. There is a procession of the seasons. The entire book of Ecclesiastes talks about how there's a time for this and a time for that. And there are certain seasons, even throughout those time periods, that themselves amplify certain things, certain pursuits, you know, certain dimensions of life itself and the quality and the sweetness of life itself that are not as sweet or as easily accomplishable or as smooth as when done in other seasons. And so, you know, if you look at that and extrapolate that on a little bigger scale, and I think you referenced a second ago something called the precession of the equinoxes, we have a serious alignment of celestial events that are producing an elevation in how Earth behaves and in how all of the celestial bodies that affect Earth, like our sun, how they behave as well. And so looking at what happened with the sun's, you know, the eclipse just of last year, I think it was April of 2024, if I'm not mistaken. Immediately after that eclipse, we saw a significant amount of escalation in the international space in both good ways and in what appeared to be not so good ways, right? Escalation of conflict in Ukraine. We saw escalation of NATO's acclaimed involvement in that conflict. We saw the discussion about the disappearance of the Russian nuclear submarine resurface back to the public narrative. But one of the things that we also saw in that process was a lot of individuals coming out saying that they had been, you know, following the signs and the seasons and the behavior of the astronomical bodies for quite a long time, and the sun appeared fundamentally changed. And I heard someone describe it as more crystalline in nature. And so if that is true, and I sort of run on a little bit of a supposition there, but when it comes from a lot of mouths, I think there may be some credence to it. If that is true, then that also would produce a change in the entirety of the world beneath the rays of that sun. And indeed, the entirety of the world has been shifting for a number of years now. We've seen volcanoes come back to life that have not been active quite literally in hundreds of years, just in the last 10-year period. We've seen, you highlighted a second ago, earthquakes. I think we tracked over 160 earthquakes in a 36-hour period just earlier this very week, over the weekend and into the early part of this week. We saw that 8.8 earthquake beneath the Kamchatka Peninsula. The Kamchatka Peninsula is one of the last remaining above water areas, above water land masses that has spiritual ties back to something called ancient Lemuria. And so with that earthquake happening, you're talking about unlocking components of the earth that have lit and energetic components of the earth, chakras, for lack of a better term. Ley lines is the proper term for it, that have been buried for a very long time under an immense amount. I mean, we're talking about an inconceivable amount of mud and refuse and dirt and soil and debris to prevent them from working the way that they always have worked. And so, in this unlocking period, you have a lot of changes that are going to happen to any entity that relies on this earth for its sustenance, for its symbiosis, and for its life journey into the future. And humanity is no exception.
Well, I'll tell you, the sun, according to, my own personal experience, I was on a hike not too terribly long ago, and I like to do a little sun gazing, when the sun is low in the sky and you don't burn your eyes out. And I was studying the sun, and it just kind of went into this vortex, and there was this turquoise color.
Oh, I was in Costa Rica.
It was no. This was the first one before we went. So then I'm in Costa Rica. I'm in Tamarindo with Joe, and I'm like, look at that, 2 suns. And he's like, what? And then I was like, hey, Marcy, do you see that? 2 suns. Because there were 2 suns clearly in the sky, one stacked right on top of each other. And they didn't see it. And I felt kind of insane. But,
that's kind of wild.
These things reveal themselves in certain ways. Yeah, and since then I have noticed a lot of that turquoise color. I've noticed some really strange things about the sun, and I spend a lot of time in the sun because I think we're getting, well, hell, I think we're downloading codes. The solar weather has been insane. It's unprecedented. I'm surprised we haven't had anything approaching a Carrington event or otherwise, but this isn't random. This is by design, and the disruptions seem to be also by design. But we are we live in the shadow of a big volcano. All the volcanoes are getting pretty excited right now, and that makes me a little nervous. But not just volcanoes. I mean, weather, and I don't mean the anomalies that are measured by, weather manipulation. I'm talking about, larger events, but these solar storms are having an impact on people, and it's measurable. You can see it. I mean, if you're paying attention, you can see it on the day it happens. You walk around, you interface with people, you see their reactions, and you understand, we're very affected. Yes. But or it's presenting a gift, depending on how you look at it.
Well, and actually that's where I was about to go with that. I think that the characterization of, downloading codes is not wholly inaccurate. I would say that we are being upgraded in the organic spiritual way. We're being prepared for the transition journey that has already begun, but has not yet concluded, with how we move this world from quite literally a lower place mentally, emotionally, spiritually, an oppressive place in many regards, to one that is amplifying of the goodness and the love and the good qualities of life. It doesn't mean that life goes from bad to good, overnight. It doesn't mean that we achieve some sort of utopic lifestyle. Maybe in 100 years or so, maybe we'll do that, maybe less than that. What would that even look like, right? These are subjective characterizations, but one thing is for certain, a better way is coming, and a different way of life interfacing and dancing with spirit, and spirit interfacing and dancing with life is absolutely coming. And the process has already begun. And so I think what you're seeing, in my opinion, is wavelength separation that's happening with individuals. They're being asked to essentially ascend, for lack of a better term, to move up the ladder, to go up the emotional scale, up the vibrational chain, to a higher understanding of themselves, to a higher understanding of the world and how things actually work. And a great many of our brothers and sisters out there will accomplish that journey in their own way. There's some coaxing more for others than, say individuals watching this broadcast, for example. Things do have to show themselves. Everyone has to have their own personal awakening experience in their own time. We've talked about these types of things, but there will be a subsect, a cross section out there that is not going to make the leap for one reason or another. And over a period of time, and I would say probably a relatively short period of time overall, they will see themselves sort of out the doorway. Whether they see themselves out of this reality through the form of the death transition, or whether they see themselves out of the associative reality of being a part of society and being ingratiated with the rest of society. I'm not a prognosticator of that pay grade. I couldn't tell you how that'll turn out, but fundamentally you will see individuals move themselves into areas where the Holy Spirit meets them where they are at. And while many of them and many of us out there are going to make this journey and will arrive at the other side with a new understanding of how the world works and how our government should function, what they're capable of doing, how easy it is for them to be co-opted, things like this, there will be some that will not. And so that wavelength separation process is very difficult in many regards, and it does produce what I would characterize as some aberrant behavior from those out there that really don't understand what is taking place and why they're undergoing their mental and emotional journey the way they are.
Right.
Well, I have to ask you, on a pointed and personal level, because I know I've been profoundly affected by what's transpired, in what we're talking about, in the last month or so. Is there any clarity that you have received? Is there any, how do I put this without getting too woo? Yeah, I mean, any visions, any memories, anything that's like flooding in, that's impactful, that you maybe took you by surprise, that's happening in the last, I don't know, month or two?
Well, interestingly enough, this entire process on my end, from a personal spiritual life journey vantage point, over the last 90 days has been nothing but expository in many regards. I wouldn't characterize it as dramatically as, say, to be having like a waking vision or a lucid dream or something along those lines. Certainly not, a high guru style spiritual experience. But, when we tend to look, I think, and again, this is just my opinion from my own walk, but I think when we tend to look at the cycles and seasons that have come before, there's some predictive analysis that can come from that and can inform us when those cycles and seasons come back around again. And so with this process that we've undergone on this end with relocation, that was a little bit, it was quite a bit unexpected in the sense of the timeline. It wasn't wholly unexpected, but the time frame, there was a misunderstanding of what the time frame was really going to be and what it needed to be. And what that caused is an unearthing of a lot of things that basically got swept up and gone through relatively quickly. And some of those things tied back to old wounds that, had happened when I was in younger years. I mean, really young, teenage years, very early 20s, that, I let them go. And it's not something I'm still bothered about or mad about at this particular time, but there's still a little bit of a twinge there at different points. So maybe some work on that is necessary. And so that prompted me to do a little bit of spiritual work and some spiritual releasing. I found a number of letters that I had written to myself, actually, when I was in college in this process, 4 or 5 of them. And they were, first of all, very poorly written, right? Because we always are worst critics when we look backwards. But, you could sort of see the difference in understanding, the difference in how far you've come, those types of things. And that was sort of profound for me in a unique and hyper individual way that I don't, I can't speak for how it would affect someone else, but I can say that for me, it prompted a moment of gratitude and thankfulness, because there has been a great deal of change. There has been a lot of development that I can trace in my life journey personally. And, these types of things, of course, showing themselves to me in this process, the fact that this process occurred at the time that it did occur, going really out of the month of June into the month of July, then all through the month of July, which tends to be a quick moving month because of the energies out there in the summer months here in the United States. It all sort of aligns itself in this idea of a broader orchestra, and God's sort of the maestro, the conductor, and you're along for the ride. So just enjoy the peace.
I gotta tell you, I mean, I was just telling Joe, I don't mean to, I was just telling Joe, I went down and visited my mother and dug through her attic and found all my old journals for decades.
Oh yeah, that gave me chills when he said that.
I know. I sat down and I read them all. It was hundreds and hundreds of pages, and yeah, it was embarrassing. I mean, it was poorly written in many cases. There were some gems, there was some good stuff, but most of it was just like cringe, and I wanted to set a fire to it. But I really got the sense that I was there to have this life review of sorts, and to really understand what made me, and to really in the perspective of who I know myself to be now, what still makes sense, what do I need to shed, what makes sense. It was a lot of insight. It was really profound, and like I said, really cringy, but powerful. And I love it that you're sharing this with me, because I think,
yeah, thank you for that.
I think, I don't know, it feels very personal, having just gone through that.
Well, I find it interesting, and I really am, I'm an individual that is of the mindset that we live in a creation that was put together to amplify not only the goodness of life, but the goodness within those that are in your life experience, right? And everybody's familiar with the concept of seasons coming, and some people are there for a season, some people are there for many longer seasons, others are there for a whole lifetime. But this is sort of a very adult, in some ways, attitude towards this concept of spirituality, and the fact that even life itself, after a number of decades, becomes sort of a temporary event, right? And then we move on to whatever comes after this. And so when we look at, when I take that understanding and I apply that to my own journey, it tends to show up in the sense that, calls unto itself like things. And so when I've had days where I've been, experiencing a particular emotion or a particular mental journey, I'll often have conversations with individuals, sometimes complete strangers, that are along those lines. If I'm in a particular mood on a, and I don't mean like a day, I mean like for a consistent number of days, where I'm sort of establishing a pattern of a mood, over many different days, I'll find that certain friends that meet me in that moody area, in many cases, that have very significant commonality with me on opinions on certain issues that may be contributing or causing those types of mood shifts or different attitudes throughout the days and the weeks, they'll show back up. They'll send a message. I'll get a phone call. I'll get I've had the email situation happen a couple of different times, those types of things. And so in some ways, it's very neat that occurred with you as well in the same period of time, because it tends to confirm from where I'm at that there is an order, that there is a structure here, that there are principles that, govern how the universe works, that were put into creation to allow us to accomplish wonderful things with one another. And if we understand them and are able to apply them, not only in the physical sense, but in the immaterial sense, in the spiritual sense, in the sense where we're not trying to gain anything, we're just trying to enjoy, the co-creative connective process, I think, that comes with that. I think that there's a lot that humanity can accomplish. And frankly, gentlemen, I think that's why they have spent wealth incalculable over the last multi-thousand-year period to prevent us from discovering exactly that.
Wow.
Yeah, I think predictively we're having parallel experiences, but what do you think?
I'm just floored by.
I mean,
by
isn't it funny that would have come up?
Yeah, no, I think
We
it's
were
also
just
very
talking
fitting.
about it.
Well, and I think there's a vulnerability and a camaraderie. You know, we've had SG on the show. I don't know, maybe the 8th or 9th time now, and we've went pretty deep on these subject matters. So I'm not too surprised that it's coming up, but to hear it's still kind of like, wow, we're able to go pretty deep on these shows.
Of course.
So I do have a question regarding free will. And what's interesting, I think, is since there's likely some other kind of species here that has infiltrated humanity, I've heard that the QFS, quantum financial system, that somehow it's going to be able to read the being or the person that's going to be making a purchase, or what the person is going to be likely using the money for.
The intention.
The intention. Thank you. So my question is on that, and in your opinion, of course, is welcome on this, is free will, is humanity able to live at its true potential with free will? And maybe because things have been hijacked or infiltrated, that we haven't really been given a fair shake at free will? Or is free will really the best idea? I mean, can humanity truly live in its potential with free will? What are your thoughts on that subject?
You know, Joe, I have to say, I don't think I've had that question asked of me since I was in a class called Ethics and Morality almost 15 years ago. And it's a phenomenal question to dive into, because I think it speaks to the crux of what a loving God would do, right? We have a universe that is ordered with such magnanimous compassion and beauty that we have the ability, we're so free in spirit and in mind, that we can choose to place ourselves in bondage if we want to. We don't have to acknowledge, the goodness and the righteousness out there. We are allowed to, what people would say, commit sin, right? We are allowed to go out and, live like a heathen, for example. That doesn't mean that it works out long term. It certainly doesn't mean that it's going to work out, on the other side after we make that death transition. I don't purport to say, what happens as a result, but I will say that, for every action, there's an opposite reaction created out there in the cosmos. That's another truality of the dualistic universe that we live in. But free will itself, in my opinion, is at the basis of everything that is good and holy, because it is the ultimate expression of trust. It is the ultimate expression of love in its purest form, an uninhibited, unabashed, unashamed, limitless, omnipotent love that is able to create more of itself and expand more of itself out there into what we would call the universe, or different sections of the universe, no matter what happens in those different subsections over a period of a short period of linear time. So the question is, can humanity really live with free will? Is that the best place to go? And have we had free will before? I think the last part of that question is the easiest to answer. I don't think it qualifies as free will when the entirety of the world around you has been a constructed deception. I think right. I think that's deprivational of free will on its face, because you cannot have free will unless you have access to the truth, right? And when we look at how the First Nations cultures have striven to live, how many tribes in today's day and time in what we would call third world nations, maintain their spirituality. Are there practices we disagree with? Yes, of course there are. But when we look at how they unearth their truth and their understanding of the world, they basically learn it from the oral tradition of the community and from nature itself. And when I say from nature, to me, that also means from God himself, because God is in the rain, God is in the leaves, God is nature and the expression of nature to its fullest. That's why we are called to nature as a form of beauty and appreciation. It is a living expression of the broader spirit that we're a part of, that powers, quite frankly, all of us. And so when we look at, what that understanding of truth becomes, in many ways, I would say that those isolated cultures, that those microcosmic pocketed tribal areas, and many of those First Nations cultures have more free will than the entirety of the Western world or the entirety of the global North, because you have such a level of deception that has been heaped onto the population by a relatively small concentration. when you do the cross-sectional analysis and you actually backtrace things where they really truly go. So whether or not humanity can live in a free will world that is a true expression of what the world is back to them, and I think that's the essence of it. I think that the question itself is unanswerable at this time, because it's really an original moment. This is the test run. This is our first true chance at this, to do something that is civilization level, that will affect the entire trajectory of this earth for a long time. And then if we do it right and with God's help, we can upgrade things, not only in the sense of how we conceive of life, but what we're able to accomplish up on this planet, period, long into the future.
You know,
Wow.
I got to throw a massive curveball into the conversation, which I think you're going to enjoy, SG. But, you know, time is not exactly linear. We experience it that way. But, I mean, even modern physics has figured out that it certainly doesn't behave in a linear fashion. That's a construct, you know, that enables our perception, you know, on this plane. But, in fact, we are multidimensional. I mean, it goes even further that we are quantum computers. You know, I mean, everybody that's trying to develop a quantum computer is kind of working on our physiology in many ways to come up with this. Jaime Harlow has elucidated this to me in so many different ways.
He's been a guest on our show several times.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I tried to get him on this week, but he is in the middle of a DoD review because he's designed a room temperature quantum computer. And I mean,
He's busy.
I can't wait. No, this is the kind of technological leap that, like, this will define everything moving forward. You know, I mean, just as from a technological standpoint. But in terms of time not being linear, and in terms of us being multidimensional, which would probably favor the idea that we are having multiple experiences simultaneously, then when you examine the idea of free will, you know, we think of free will on a linear scale, right? It's like, if I make this decision at this point in time, how will it impact me at this point in time? It's all linear, right? That's how we tend to relate to free will. Free will doesn't really work that way, but it is about your heart, your intentions, the sum total of you know, what you've created, you know, as an individual, what's become meaningful and your impact on the world. So, I mean, wrap your head around that, right? But I think we're getting closer and closer to understanding our potential, you know, outside of linear time. And I mean, I think we're coming up on a moment where we're going full multidimensional. At least a greater part of us here with humanity. What do you think? Did I get too out there?
Well, no, I think I can get around that just a little bit here. You know, you're talking about the timeless and also linear time realization, right? Really what we're talking about is the level of awareness. And so, you know, let's step back for just a second and take this question with a giant, you know, umbrella point of view. Let's step back and take a macro point of view. And I'm gonna suppose, just for a moment, to answer the question. So this is a little bit suppository in nature, but I'm gonna suppose for a moment that, you know, we'll say, for the purposes of this question, we don't have just one lifetime. Let's say that there are multiple concurrent lifetimes.
Yep.
Let's allow ourselves to say that there could be a potential, you know, linear time lifetime to come after this one, in a different experience, in a different environment, perhaps at a different point along the way in what we would consider the timeline of the space-time continuum.
It's a very linear way of looking at it, but yeah.
So let's start there and appreciate then that free will has to be good for the soul, not just in one phase, in one experience, in one, we'll call it lifetime or life journey or form, or however you want to characterize that.
Bingo.
And so if one has a journey that is happening in many different ways all at the same time, or if one is, you know, a broader spiritual being who with proper connected anatomy would be able to detect and discern what that broader spiritual capacity is actually doing in other places, perhaps through memory, perhaps through regressive, past life regressive episodes, perhaps through consulting in prayer with God and with the Spirit, and having that Spirit reveal things unto you, whatever lens you want to ascribe to that. If that process is occurring, and this is the suppositional basis for the question, then one would have to acknowledge that all of the different decisions being made would have to ultimately result in a conglomerated benefit, a net positive, a net gain for the soul of the person, for who one really is. We are extensions of the living God here in this world. We are physical creatures, but we're much, 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 much more than that. And so with that, quality in mind, and bearing that quality in mind, we have to look at, I think, this question from the vantage point of what is best for who we really are. In other words, what is best for creation as a result of the decisions we make? What is best for those that are in those experiences with us relative to the decisions that we're making? Not that we're making decisions for them, but I think the majesty of it is that the decisions we all make collectively throughout lives, even decisions that negatively impact some, often end up impacting them positively in other ways as we go forward. So that's what I'm talking about. It's a very longitudinal lens here. What is best for the soul over a period, we'll say, of a multiple lifetime experience, or in a multi-lifetime experience that's happening in real time, perhaps in ways that one is not totally conscious of. You have individuals that have regressed memories, for example, of things that have happened to them, typically negative, when they're very, very young. You could make the case that that's almost like an existence jump or a dimension jump in some capacity. I've heard people talk about having repressed memories that just absolutely bring them to their knees because it doesn't feel real, and yet they know that it's them. They know that they're the ones there. They know that the experience was real. They were signs and sights and smells and different signs along the way, things like that compel them into the experience to know that it's real. And yet they'll sit there and they'll tell you it felt like a different lifetime, or it felt like a different experience. And it's difficult in some cases for individuals to isolate whether or not it was in fact during this particular time. I'll close my answer to this question off. And again, I put out there for the audience, this is mostly speculatory and opinion based, because it's very esoteric and it's a very philosophical question sort of on its face. But one of the comments that was made by my little one about a year ago, maybe a little bit over a year ago, was that he remembered how he had died. And of course, I made the comment, that's not possible, because, you were just born XYZ years ago, and, you've got a lot of life ahead of you and things like that. And he proceeded to describe to me in detail things that a child of his age really should not be able to articulate correctly. And it was a very sort of, it was a very surreal experience for me, because it got my gears thinking. Is he having an experience within an experience? Is he having a memory of something that perhaps was real? Is this a contrivance of some crazy media that he's intaken, which I think is a perfectly reasonable assessment of that also? Where is this really coming from? And to this point, I don't have an answer for that question, but I find it very interesting that we often hear from children, especially under the age of 10, about experiences that they've had, or that they talk about, or that they think that they've had, or that they're remembering, that are detailed and very thorough, but of course are patently impossible given the existence in this lifetime.
Now, how old did you say he was?
So my son is a second grader.
Yeah, but I mean in years.
He's 7.
Okay. So, well, that's interesting that you say that, because between 1 and 7,
Right.
It's said that we are multidimensional. Life will beat that out of you, sadly. But, when you watch, especially with babies, it's really easy to see. You walk in and you'll watch them, and they're seeing things. They do this whole, they're interacting with things that you can't see, and you just think, well, that's cute, baby stuff or whatever. But what they're seeing is very real. They're very multidimensional at that age. Your son is just, at the cusp of coming out of that multidimensionality. Hopefully he can hang on to it a little bit longer. But yeah, those memories are available. These, I've had incredible experiences where I was thrust back into other lifetimes when I was a kid. I am shared this, but I was in church with my mother, and I can't even remember my age. I was
5,
young.
I think.
Yeah. And all of a sudden I was gone. I mean, I was gone. I was in another reality, and I was walking with Christ. I mean, and I didn't have any ideas about, I mean, I wasn't a religious person. Christ wasn't all that significant to me at the time, but there I was. I could smell the dust. I could feel it on my skin. I mean, the sensual aspects of it were more real than anything I've ever felt. And I was there, and I felt all the emotion and all the memories of who I was in that moment right then. But I'm a kid, so how the hell am I remembering any of this? But I did. And I mean, I'll tell you, I was gone. I mean, I had left the reality. Bam, I came right back in, and I was looking around like, am I okay? I mean, did anyone see that? It was nuts. And that actually happened a couple of times, but it really, from an early age, kind of illustrated how things work. It's not linear. And that was me, and those were my memories. And you can tell when your imagination is working, and you can tell when you're remembering something. And I'm sure the audience will have plenty to say about this. I don't think it's a terribly unique experience, but profound, I have to say. And I've had many since then that kind of confirm that. But yeah, this isn't linear. We are returning. We are here with purpose, and it's a small percentage of you that's operating in this perception, in this reality right now. The rest of you is busy getting the work done. I think, at least, that's how I feel about my own personal life.
That's an interesting characterization, because I think in many regards we do have multiple aspects of who we really are that are imbued with the talents we have, the gifts we have, the way we see the world, the perceptions that we hold, the life experiences that we've led since we were young that shaped and formed our understandings and our belief systems about the whole of creation around us, that are here with purpose. It's not, I've never, even since I was very young, and when I was going through my own spiritual journey, I went through a period of, spiritual rebellion like everybody does. And, one of the things that I did not ever really rebel from or shun away from was the idea that there was a divine design, that there is a real purpose for it, that there's an order behind, and really an intention, maybe is the better way to say it, behind why we're all here. Everyone does have something to offer. Now, I think in some ways we get ourselves afield worrying about what that is, how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, how are we going to accomplish this, what am I supposed to do with my life, what does God want for my life? That's a question I hear a lot from people in various discussions, right? And I think we miss the ball game, if you will, for willingness to focus so much on what's happening with the shoes, or what's happening with the referee's eyeballs, or things like that, right? We're missing the enjoyment of the experience because I think we're looking for love in all the wrong places. And so I think when we step back and we just acknowledge that there is a purpose, that there is a divine design behind it, that this is a spiritual journey more than a physical journey. Life itself is a spiritual journey, and our realm is a spiritual realm that has spiritual laws, and laws that we can tap into and leverage, and laws that we can understand. There are mysteries of the scripture that are not all demonic. That is not to say that some aren't. Some certainly are, but there are knowledge bases that have been drummed out of our literature, have been drummed out of our historic record, that are there, that were there for our benefit, that were placed there by great masters and students and seers who went and communed with God and had time directly with God. And much of that was obfuscated and taken out as well. And so we're seeing, I think, a resurgence of all of that wisdom, of all of that understanding, in preparation, again, and I hate to wax a little repetitive here, but in preparation to take this planet from where it has been and where it has been sort of consigned to over the last however long it's been, a multi-thousand-year period just in its current form, and push it into the future in a way that really balances it out and brings about the proper understanding of who humanity and really what Earth itself and where Earth itself in the cosmos really is supposed to be.
Wow. What do you think? God, it's sometimes I just want to sit with what's being talked about, but
Me too.
I know we're doing a show, so do you think that humanity has at any time ever lived in our true potential, or has it always been infiltrated by some darkness or entities from the beginning of the human experience?
That's an interesting question, Joe. I think where I would fall with that, based on the stuff that I read and the research that I've done, the last time, if there was truly a time where we existed in a pure form between us and God and us and creation around us, we'll call it the Garden of Eden. But I think the Garden of Eden is a terminology to describe the wonderment of the world itself, my own personal opinion. But I think the last time that would truly happen was prior to whatever the Great Fall event was. And when we look at some of the books that were taken out of the Bible, one of the things that they tell us is that Eve actually procreated with the serpent, with the evil side of things. And so there was a DNA contamination. There was, quite literally a concerted effort to infiltrate this wonderful new creation of the living God right from the very beginning. But there was a period of time, and we don't know how long that time was. The Bible describes it as a walk with God in the garden. The Bible also describes 7 day or a day equaling 1,000 years. So we could also be talking about a 7,000 year period of time. Regardless of what the characterization is, that period of time before the fall, we walked and talked with God. There was openness in creation, the likes of which has not been seen since. There was no need for clothing because there was no corruption that resulted in the need for something like that, right? And so returning to that, whatever that looks like, I think that's the mission here. Whether we go all of the way back to the garden's days in the coming decades and centuries, whether we get very close to that, whether we just get back to a proper balance of communal living with nature and giving God the glory in the morning and in the evening time, like our ancestors and forefathers did before us. However that turns out, I think it's ultimately going to result in us taking on a new identity as a civilization, a new place, really taking our place amongst the cosmos and amongst history here in the world as reclaiming what was rightfully ours to begin with.
Very well said.
Yeah, I want to respond to that with regard to Eden. Joe asked me a while back about, well, Scott, what do you think? Is the earth round or is it flat? And I said, well, I hate that question. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I will tell you that it's neither and it's both. So I think I'm correct in that. But when it comes to Eden, I think Eden is the other dimensional aspect of Earth. I think this is much larger than we could imagine. We just don't have access to it because of our dimensional paradigm, which I think is changing like daily. Now, like it's literally happening now. As evidenced by all of the solar activity and whatnot. I mean, I feel it every day. I mean, maybe I'm just delightfully imaginative. I don't know, but it sure is. Shit feels real to me. And yeah, what do you think? I mean, I think we are in Eden. I think it is about bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth, and I think it has to do with an awakening. And I think we're in the midst of that very awakening right now. Not everybody's going to see it. It kind of depends on your soul's journey. But what do you think, SG?
Well, honestly, I think that's probably a great place also to leave the discussion, because you're exactly right. We are creating the conditions to prime exactly that. We are bringing, heaven on earth, for lack of a better characterization, to the forefront here. And in order to do that, there has to be a drilling out. There has to be a shaking out. You don't begin to build a brand new, wonderful building until you've taken down the old one, and you've also removed the things from the old one's construction site that would inhibit the growth and the expansion and the planting of that new building, right? It has to be a clean space. It has to be firm. It has to be, sure of itself in many regards, sure-footed. You could characterize that as confidence or understanding, right? It has to have some age to it. The soil has to be, it can't just be brand new dirt that you've put on it yesterday. It has to settle. There has to be some experience quite literally applied. You could characterize that as wisdom. And in this process that we're going through, I think at a macro civilization level, it is going to result in a heaven on earth experience, certainly by comparison to what we have right now. You need to look no further than any country in the Western world to see what corporocratic tyranny can do to the human spirit, and certainly can do to the human psyche. And so an upgrade from that, heaven on earth from that, would be a self-determinative, liberty-focused society where individuals generally act with goodwill towards one another. And I think we can ask no more than that. And I think that's exactly where we're headed. This is an exciting time. We've got this great American fair going on now. It's supposed to conclude with some pretty significant events in July of 2026. We've got all of these different geopolitical events, all of the different, we'll call them Earth-style events, natural events, the quakes, the volcanoes, all of these things pointing towards this movement of energy to a convergence point. And I think that convergence point is not terribly far away from us if we look at it with a more generational calendar, and not a calendar where we're waiting for it next week.
Yeah, well, I think we've had more quakes above 5.8 or whatever in than we've ever had in Earth's history, as far as anything that's ever been recorded. This is happening. I know our volcanoes are getting kind of excited. I'm a little nervous about that. Like, please, Rainier, chill out a little bit. But there's so many anomalies. There's such crazy space weather. We haven't even really touched current events all that much, but I'm really happy because I think in favor of that, we discussed what was really important. But if we want to just kind of rapid fire, because I know we don't have you all night, the Tulsi Gabbard conversation about UFOs, Trump going all soft deck with the regard to Israel.
Oh, right.
It's very disturbing what's happening with Israel, but my theory, maybe we should take these one at a time. My theory on that one is, I'm just going to list them, but they're too big. They're just too big. My theory was that there are some unaccounted for suitcase nukes. I've had this confirmed from a lot of people that are really rather qualified. I think there's a unique kind of blackmail that's taking place regarding Israel, and everything has to be handled very sensitively. That's why Trump is taking the position he's taking, which seems to be rather weak, in my opinion, and the opinion of most folks. So what is happening with Israel? We'll leave it at that.
Well, I will say I'm coming up on a little bit of a time warning here on this end, but with respect to this particular question, I think this might actually be even a better place to leave it than the previous comment, because this is an example of the conditions being created to prime that spiritual awakening in real time, in my opinion. When we talk about Israel, we're talking about a very, very old group of individuals that took over the name Israel and constructed a nation state in the Middle East named Israel that has nothing to do with the biblical Israel, right? This is a giant, a literal country-sized sleight of hand that has occurred with, on the ground there in that area of the world since the late 1940s. And so the individual groups that have been in control of the main power factions and junctions inside that nation state happen to be the direct representatives of the dark occultist families. They happen to be directly involved with the central bankers going all of the way back to the late 19th century. They have familial ties to Neapolitan royalty. They have familial ties to Holy Roman Emperor royalty going back to Central Europe and especially in the Polish region. There's ties in the Israeli government that tie back to the Swedish royal family. So looking at what's happening on the ground with Israel in today's day and time, you have a playground, a sandbox, for lack of a better term, that was purposefully created to be the exportation point and the reception point for all of the significant strong-arming blackmail, all of the significant leverage, all of the technological capabilities, the data aggregation, the power, influence, and control through intangible and unusual means like monetary control, corporate business control, technological control, backdoor access control, things like that. Much of it flowing through Langley and through the state of Israel from the 1950s all of the way up to the present time. So when we talk about saving Israel for last, or when we talk about, Israel being critical to whatever happens with these events going forward, we're talking about the nation state that has the ability to terminate the Mediterranean and Red Sea cables and destroy communication and internet access in the entirety of the West for a period of weeks, not days. You're talking about a nation state that has a long storied history of being connected to underground tunneling systems, because that area of the world has been tunneled out for literally thousands of years by the Assyrians, by the Arabians, by all of the various the Babylonians, all of the various factions that have lived in the Arabic Crescent, the Fertile Crescent over there for thousands of years. And this infrastructure ties into the modern state of Israel that for the last 75 years at this point has utilized it for all sorts of nefariousness, including things like weapons trafficking and biopathogen trafficking. You've also got a significant amount of chemical warfare that has been produced in the state of Israel and exported all around the rest of the planet through innocuous means, because in Israel, for the longest time, there was not a law requiring the labeling of certain ingredients on items, even for exports, so long as those items still met customs requirements in their export destinations. We've got arms trafficking that has come into and gone from the nation state of Israel and Egypt, by the way, because Cairo and Tel Aviv have sort of been a junction, a fulcrum seesaw where this has swung throughout that area, one controlling the Suez, one controlling the Eastern Med and the Levant access to the Arabic regions. And so you've seen a lot of that coming out of that area and coming back into that area. Egypt, for the longest time, was essentially a stopover. It was like a breathing space for the intelligence community as they would conduct their nefarious activities in Africa and then go to the Egyptian area for a rest over and a refuel, and then go into the Arabic regions to continue whatever destabilizing activities were going on there, and then up, of course, through Turkey and into southeastern Europe. So I know this is a long answer to this question, Scott, but I think it's important to set it up in the proper context for people out there. You have a nation state that has done nothing but blackmail every single group, every single political level of power and pulpit of power, not just in the United States, but in a lot of the entirety of the Western world for over 50 years at this point, that has also managed to build a nuclear threat assessment base that is significant in quantity, or it was significant in quantity, estimated to be pretty significant. We know that microcrystalline technology has allowed for a lot of reduction in things like nuclear warheads and those types of things. And it wouldn't surprise me if you had scientists in that area of the world doing exactly what they have accused Iran of doing for the last 30 to 40 years. So with that, and with the Trump government right now, I want to posit a question for the audience out there. Let's rewind for a moment to September 11th of 2001 and look at what occurred there. And let's take a moment and appreciate what happened to our society as a result of that. And instead of what actually occurred after September 11th, 2001, which was the selling out of everything that was good and wholesome in the United States, basically the suspension of the Constitution and constitutional protections, a total military tyranny put into place in the background. Had that not gone that way, what would it have looked like? When I posit this question, what I'm trying to drive at is, what if the president of the United States had intelligence that was actionable and agencies that were not wholly captured by deep state intelligence communities that were able to point out and show who was actually responsible for that event? What would have occurred in the entirety of the annals of history if we had been able to adjudicate from the start, from the president and from the military, that this was a weaponized foreign attack conducted by a foreign country using domestic traitors and terrorists stateside in our homeland to help facilitate that attack? What would the law enforcement response have looked like throughout the nation? Who would have really been apprehended and taken into for questioning and things like that? What type of conditions would have been acceptable by the American public to say, yes, come in and take these traitors out of this community? If that's what they helped facilitate, then I don't want any part of that. What would that have actually looked like? And I sit back and I say that obviously, and I think the audience probably knows where I'm going with this, that I think a similar style scenario is very likely as we go forward, and maybe not in the sense of a terrorist attack on American soil, but in the sense of a significant geopolitical event tying back to the state of Israel, perhaps an act of war, perhaps an act of, moral reprehension and sort of chagrin at the entirety of the international level that forces some sort of action, whatever that happens to be. If we have an infiltrative component that can be tied directly to the entirety of the Washington, D.C. swamp, the Clinton cabal that runs the D.C. syndicate, the Tehrannian group that are tied in with the Clintons and the Obamas that are all part of the same crowd tying back to the Israeli intelligence communities. If we're able to wrap that up in a neat narrative in response to an event, either stateside or otherwise, in this process, then it is actually advantageous in this period of time to take the step back, if you will. I'm starting to get late. It's getting a little bit tired here. It's advantageous, to take a step back and to say maybe now, maybe this moment in time, maybe right here, right now at this present moment is not the best time to play this card, because there's more to be gained by letting this go on a little bit longer. I think that's what President Trump is doing. I think the idea of threats still being out there is very real. I think that's a concern that has to be acknowledged every single day as we go forward. But fundamentally, if you can wrap the deep state in its entirety up in one little bow and present it to the American public at the same time that you're also going to present them accountability, I think we can change the entirety of what the government looks like and not have a civil war scenario break out.
Agreed. I'm just thinking, we're at that point. I know we got to wrap it up, but rapid fire conclusion. Is Obama going to jail? Is his ilk going to jail? What are we going to see in the next, let's just say, month? And we'll wrap it on that one.
I will say this. I don't think that you're going to see Obama in jail. I think you're going to see Obama in front of a military commission before this process is over.
Yes.
And I think, Trump has told us that a couple of times, but we're seeing that right now, right? And so I don't think that we're going to see that happen next month. We're seeing the process, the buildup, quite literally beginning towards this climactic end, where there's some justice for the American deep state that sold out the Republic and sold out the Constitution. And so the Crossfire Hurricane situation with Mueller is now being targeted by the House Oversight Committee. The records released by DNI Tulsi Gabbard, she held nothing back. She's gone on broadcast openly calling Obama a traitor to the country and responsible for a treasonous conspiracy. President Trump put out on Truth Social himself, those involved should pay a severe price so that this never happens again in our country. I'm very, very excited to see who flips on who. I think you're going to see individuals like Liz Cheney coming back into the circuit. I think you're going to see Adam Kinzinger back in the circuit in the next several weeks. They're really not going to get away, and that sort of sums up in a nice way the entirety of our call today. Right? There's no way that the events that have been spawned off now in the consciousness of mankind cannot happen, because you just have too many human beings with too common of an understanding pushing for the same overall outcome, which is accountability, fairness, and justice, and the removal of obvious corrupt and evil influences inside of our organizations, our countries, our cultures. So regardless of what happens and regardless of the pace that it happens, nobody involved in this process, nobody playing the game is going to get a free pass and be able to walk away from this. And this is going to be a purging process that will literally prime us for a spiritual awakening that this planet has never seen before.
Beautifully
well
said.
You got any final questions or?
No, it's just such an honor to have you here.
What a great show.
And thanks for staying with us late. And I wanted to say,
too long.
I just want to say on SG's, it's called the Q News Patriot on Rumble. He just released this post 7 hours ago, and it says, "Save our children and human trafficking forever." And there is it looks like a tweet that says, and from Christina Bobb, and you guys can check this out on his page. It's about a 4-minute video. In 2016, crowds shouted, "Lock her up," but real Donald Trump chose not to. He said he wanted the nation to heal. He won't make that mistake twice. And I think that ties in nicely as to allowing things to happen, because now the climate is much more fitting and people are really looking for responsibility to be to be had. So I think this is a great subject to close it out on, and I just absolutely love our conversations and these time capsules. It's amazing. It's amazing that Scott and I have these conversations publicly with someone like you. It's just we don't take it for granted, and we just appreciate it, and it's an honor to be doing these shows. And also shout out to Sound Alive Radio for airing this as well. So it's an amazing place to be. So thank you guys for sharing this with us. So
absolutely. Any final thoughts, SG?
I think my final thoughts would be that as we go forward, we have to keep in mind where we've come from. We get lost in the muckety muck sometimes, and and especially for those patriots that are really, really awake, like the audience that follows this show, there's a certain amount of impatience, right? There's a certain amount of, how can you not see it yet? How is it not so obvious? But as we go, forward in this process, we have accomplished essentially what amounts to a consciousness shift. And now what we're waiting for is the rest of the consciousness to catch up. The fact that we eclipsed that event horizon at all is monumental. It's an incredible achievement. It's an accomplishment. We literally beat $1 trillion propaganda machine with memes. And so as we go forward, I say that with some humor, but also with a lot of severe seriousness. As we go forward, we are going to be teaching one another and learning with one another, and hopefully learning, relearning some of the better ways to do things that the ancients knew long ago, that have, they've done everything they can to strip out of our history. It could not be a more exciting time than this. Maybe my only exception to that would be walking next to Christ throughout Judea and Samaria and hearing the words directly from his mouth. But outside of that, this is where it's at. This is really the time for all of us to buckle down and appreciate that we were chosen to be here in this world at this time by God, who trusted us enough to change this planet for the better.
I couldn't agree more.
That was beautiful.
Wow.
Said.
Yeah, we should end on that note, because we're not going to get better than that.
Absolutely.
Love you, sir. Thank you again for joining us. We can't wait for the next show. Hopefully we'll do that sooner than later.
Yep.
I know it's been a while, but thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me, gentlemen. Good to be here. God bless all.
All right. Take care, SG. We'll say bye to the audience. Thank you. Sleep well, my friend.
Good night, all.
Wow. What a treat to have. And he was if you caught us this, so if anyone came in a little bit later, this went very deep. It's a very esoteric conversation. The current events were more at the tail end. But his little one spilled some milk on the floor, and he needed to clean that up. So we apologize for a little bit of a late start. But
we're not going to cry over spilled milk, though.
That's right.
No,
that's right.
Yeah.
So
what a great show.
Yeah,
what a great guy. We always have great shows with him.
We always have great shows.
Tonight was especially good, I thought.
Yeah, we went. A lot of times we do focus on the current events, and this was really great to go deep and to also have him talk about how he was reading some previous letters, just like you were.
I know, the parallels are unreal.
That was really cool.
Yeah.
So,
my whole life review. Amy, I noticed your comment earlier. It was sweet. All right. Well, I guess we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, you guys, and if you're looking for we post the upcoming shows more in our Telegram and our X channel, but we kind of have a loose schedule just because it depends. Like tonight's a perfect example. It depends on the availability of the guest.
You got to herd cats. But I'll tell you, tomorrow at 3 o'clock, we're bringing the boys in the bridge back. Nick Sylvester and Dylan are going to be back. I can't wait.
That's 3 p.m. Pacific.
Yeah, I crammed a lot of shit into one day. I'll tell you, I've got a dental appointment in the morning, then I have to get my brakes done, and then I have to rush back here to do that show. So prayers for Scott, right, that we can pull that off, and it's going to be great. You guys don't want to miss that one. So, Nick and Dylan from the bridge. It's going to be very in the woo, very much a spiritual conversation, I think. And if that's your bag, you don't want to miss it.
Yeah. And what else? Anything else in closing?
Ireland. Yeah, hey, if anybody wants to go to Ireland, it's coming up. Real quick, there's still spots available.
Oh yeah, I wanted to share. I'm on my darn.
Yeah, there are still spots available, and we're pretty excited about it. We may be changing the schedule a little bit.
Well, we'd have to figure that.
We'll figure all that out. But anyway, if there's any interest, please let us know. I know Amy's coming. That's gonna be fun. So yeah, we're gonna have a hell of a time. Mark has built something otherworldly there, and we're all gonna go experience it. So if you want to be a part of that, please reach out. Let us know.
I think that's it. All right. Well, we will wrap up with our sponsor for the evening. Some folks know about the Syrona NAD, some don't, but I'll be
yeah. We haven't really talked pointedly about it, but my God, you like all the Syrona products, you really feel it. And I took Huperzine A back in the day when I was really exploring nootropics. Didn't do anything for me because it wasn't nano-sized.
Right.
But now, I'm just saying, try it for yourself, folks. It's kind of a life changer.
There you go.
So, as are all the Syrona products. Ethan Lucas is he's a brilliant guy. I know he's got a foul mouth. Some of you don't like that, but
he certainly does.
Yeah, but I mean, he's got the whole Bible memorized, and the guy is just, I mean, how many talents can one guy have? It's amazing. So
he's got, he does have.
We love Ethan. We love Syrona. We take it daily. You should check it out.
There we go. Well, we'll roll with that, and then the outro, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. I'm not sure what I'm doing tomorrow, but Scott will be there for sure with the boys. So Nick,
God willing. Yeah.
All right. We'll roll out with this.
All right, everybody.
Take care, everybody. Cheers.
Introducing Syrona's revolutionary nano NAD plus supplement, Lucid. Syrona's breakthrough nanotechnology is transforming how our bodies absorb and use delicate nutrients like NAD. Instead of swallowing a pill and losing most of it to digestion, you simply place it under your tongue, where it's absorbed directly into your bloodstream. This sublingual method allows NAD to bypass the hostile digestive tract entirely. Even liposomal NAD can't truly solve this problem the way our proprietary nanotechnology does. NAD is essential for energy production and DNA repair, but our levels naturally decline as we age. NAD is the central redox cofactor, accepting electrons during vital processes like glycolysis, beta oxidation, and the TCA cycle. Without enough NAD, ATP production slows, and cells face an energy crisis. Unlike NADH, which is a temporary electron donor, NAD+, the oxidized form of NAD, is what your cells actually use up in metabolism and repair. With our proprietary stasis nanotechnology, you get highly effective oxidized NAD+ delivered directly into your bloodstream. No needles, no clinic visits. It's simple, fast, and effective. And if you haven't heard, direct NAD delivery, like Syrona's Lucid formula, is now being intensely researched by doctors and scientists worldwide for Alzheimer's, neurodegenerative diseases, addiction recovery, chronic fatigue, anti-aging, mitochondrial disorders, weight loss, and many other chronic conditions. 1 month's supply costs less than $100, not hundreds or thousands of dollars like other NAD supplements. And this comes with results that not only rival other expensive treatments, in most cases, the results are actually far better and last longer. Visit Syrona.org to order your Syrona Nano NAD Plus supplement today and unlock your best self. No needles, no clinic, no house payment size bills, just results.
The other way.
this is what we've evolved into.